So I've been asked tonight to speak about the seventh grave prohibitory precept, no praise, no blame. And that's part of the 16 precepts that we take here. Uh, there's the 3 refuge vows, the 3 pure precepts, and then the 10 grave prohibitory precepts. So no praise, no blame. I see the precepts themselves as uh, like a glue, like teachings that won't be able to leave us no matter what we would decide to do with our lives. That at one point in our lives we wanted to take these precepts in front of a preceptor, with a preceptor, and in front of a community, to engender a seriousness around what the Buddhist teachings are. And maybe seriousness isn't the best word, but at least a commitment to return to them, a commitment to contemplate what the precepts are as we take them and as we move forward in our life. So no praise, no blame. Praise and blame, it shows up in Buddhist material as the 8 worldly dharmas, which I'm not familiar with exactly where they come from. I've heard a little bit about them, but I think they're pain and pleasure, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, or kind of social standing, those 2 polarities. And something else I can't think of. Any of you guys know the one I missed?
Pain and pleasure.
Pain and pleasure. Yep, thinking. So looking at that polarity, that I understand 8 worldly dharmas is that it's just what we tend to go to, how our culture values things, or we as humans in our culture value going after pain and getting away from pleasure. So I think the emphasis is just to observe that we do that, and maybe we don't need all the grasping and warfare that comes through the pursuit of those. The rising of the 8 worldly dharmas is bound to happen, but the important part of our practice is to see clearly, to see the way we just don't want to be in pain. So we'll torture others to get out of that pain, or we want pleasure so much that we'll torture ourselves or others to get toward that pain or toward that pleasure. And same with the other 8 worldly dharmas, or that seems to be what shows up if we examine those closely, is that there's quite a demand on those 8 worldly dharmas. So to focus a bit more on praise and blame, we're always concerned about what people think. We praise ourselves for doing such a good job at any number of things, whether it's our natural talents, our looks, or how hard we work at something and finally achieve a goal. And we receive praise from others. And quite often, this can reinforce an identity that is unreal. It's not that those things are wrong, that we praise and blame each other. It's that we need to be aware of what we're doing when we're praising someone. Usually when we're praising someone, we want to be someone who praises someone. We want to be kind to others. We want to uplift them. And in that kind of relative way, that seems like a workable way of doing it. But oftentimes there's an unexamined intention behind praising people. Sometimes it's to get out of our own suffering, or to be a helper person, to be someone who is easy to be around. So praise, we praise others often to shield ourselves. We praise ourselves to shield ourselves. And then the other end of this is blame. We blame someone else. We think that they caused us to feel the way that we're feeling. It's just easier than feeling pain of our emotions, pain of situations. So it's easier to go into our mind and protect our sense of self by some temporary relief by blaming someone else. And at this point, I'll read the long version of the precept because I think that it goes a bit into there not being anyone to praise or blame. The seventh, no praise or blame. Only Buddha action exists. To know that there is no one to hurt and no one to be, no one to hurt and no one. It just says it twice. It's like a typo. To know that there is no one to hurt and no one to be hurt. There we go. No one to benefit and no one to be benefited. We bow to all beings and openly acknowledge what has been done. So there's that aspect of this that there's no one to praise. You can't take credit for what happens in your life. You didn't, even if you think you decided to endeavor to take on a project that people praised you for, that wasn't all you're doing. You needed the rest of the world to do that. And it was out of your control anyway. Just the causes and conditions that arise as any one thing are beyond our grasp and control. So to praise something for showing up in a particular way is a bit of a misunderstanding if we're buying into that, if we truly believe that this thing should be held up high. In one sense, it's creating warfare with what is down low, what is relatively blameworthy. Just by praising, we can create that warfare by thinking that something's valuable, and subtly we will probably go against things that aren't so savory when that unsavory aspect of our lives also needs to be supported too. We quite often forget that in our pursuit to be happy. Another way of looking at this is that they're the same thing, praise and blame. Similar to, I like the analogy of nerve endings with pain and pleasure is for me a interesting gateway into how things are the same. That when something feels nice on your nerve ending, it's just sensory input. It's the same input. It's hitting the same nerve. It's just received. It would be another way of putting it, that the texture or quality is in the same spectrum, so to speak, of praise and blame, and that relatively they depend on each other. You couldn't have praise without blame. You wouldn't have good guys without bad guys. In the world of duality, you need both sides. There really wouldn't be such a thing as praise if everything was perfect. So in that way, they're also similar. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't praise or even blame. I think that we should just do our best to see clearly when we're doing that, and I don't know that it's a misunderstanding. I think goes too far, but just to witness it, to receive what shows up as someone in our apparent external world blaming or us blaming. I'll take questions at this point. Or I can keep talking if there aren't any. Ondo.
Ondo bowing. What do we do when we are like finding ourselves at the receiving end of blame? That seems to be laden with assumptions. Bowing.
I think it depends on the situation, but I think the general response would be to just receive it. You might not have to do anything with it, or you could ask them more. Maybe oftentimes when people are blaming, it's a pretty intense cover up for something else. So maybe through your action or words or body language, you could try to understand that they're suffering and help them with that. And that might just be listening to them and not saying a word or walking away. So it varies, but I think as the general response would be to receive it. You don't necessarily have to do anything with that.
Ondo bowing, is there a time when receiving is passive, and what would it look like to see, if you're receiving and yet the blame continues to come? And it seems to be having an effect on others. Is there such a thing as being too passive with just receiving? Bowing.
I think so. I think we've been blamed of that even. I've been blamed of that. And I think that there's something to that. I think that you can just be a doormat for someone and they can bowl over you, and it's the time to show some strength or stand your ground where but it depends on the situation. Or I'm thinking of one where it feels like quite an avalanche with more than one tendril. It's not just the person in front of you, it's a whole landslide of flame. And to deal with that, it feels like receiving might be the best way to do it. And if a way to work with that shows up, then it'll just show up as it needs to. But we don't need to have a strategy or a fear of being too receptive, that we're not doing enough to prevent that kind of action that would be appropriate.
Ondo bowing, even if it seems to have an impact on people who, I don't know, they go so far as to say that they might be harmed, but they seem to be affected by it and turn away from at least this teaching. Bowing.
What was the question?
Do we continue to receive even if it looks like there's harm to what I would say are innocent bystanders, innocent people? It's a sketchy question.
Or just kind of vague, or still depends, or do you have a way of phrasing it differently?
Ondo bowing, I don't know if it would come up with a different answer on your part, but is there a point when we need to step into it?
Yes, but you don't have to figure it out beforehand. It'll just happen on its own. And maybe it'll look like a mistake to you. Maybe afterwards you'll think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But I would say lean on your awareness practice, lean on your training, lean on the teachings of reception first. I would just as a general suggestion say that that's a good place to start, but it's only you that can act or not act, or that's your practice. This is to help us navigate our lives, but for someone else to tell you that there is a point at which something tips over and needs to happen isn't helpful.
One more time,
Mhm.
one more attempt. It seems like though there could be, not a standard, but something that's showing up where there are people that are being, I guess I can't put it into words.
Okay. SokukoJi.
What traditional teaching of Buddha's Dharma is showing up in the very last part of that long form of the seventh precept? Openly acknowledge what has been done. What is being pointed at with that teaching? It's kind of a mundane way of saying it, but what's being directly pointed at from your understanding?
Not very clear on your question. If you're asking me to link it to another Buddhist teaching, what one that shows up is no dwelling on past mistakes or that, but
Okay.
I feel like I'm missing what you.
It's like that. I was thinking more of a dependent origination, a way of relating to whatever shows up, we acknowledge it. Rather than we go into one of these two that are the very topic of the seventh. That's what I was looking for there. It was a test.
Fail.
Well, don't shake that stick at me. No, it's openly acknowledged. It's like there's a very definite direction there, but not a lot of help. Openly acknowledge what has been done. It's like it brings up immediately. Shouldn't we do something about it? Like Ondo was kind of referring to that a little bit. We do something about it. Is there a time when we do something about something rather than avoid praise and blame?
Absolutely. I think every day, I think that's through the reception that the openly acknowledging dependent origination is that you don't know what's going to happen next. And you don't even know if that bad, stinky thing in front of you isn't going to flip over on its head the next second. So we need to be tentative about, or maybe that's going too far to say be tentative too. I would say just practice rather than have a mind frame of being tentative about everything. But yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Sure.
Shoulder bowing, maybe a similar area, but like, could you go into the difference or the distinction between praise and blame and just openly acknowledging bowing?
Openly acknowledging just feels like a presence, a reception. Just being present is an acknowledgement that nothing needs to be done with anything, that the reception is enough, that's acknowledgement, is to see clearly, to see what's in front of you, to hear what someone's saying without so much garbage of your mind. Or if you have so much garbage of your mind, you're at least aware of that and could ask them to repeat it. Or that you don't know what's happening, that you openly acknowledge that you can't know anything, you don't know what this is, that you're lost in every moment, and going into praise or blame is solidifying the world and is based off of misunderstanding. Even though sometimes we need to act and go into that area, we're humans, we're conditioned this way. It's a hard life, it's suffering. We need to participate in that and not be some special receivers, because that's just not how we show up either. It's both. We're openly acknowledging and we're confused at the same time. Jushin?
Nishikai. Perhaps I will repeat the same question, maybe from another angle. What do we acknowledge if there is no praise and blame? If we acknowledge bowing?
I don't know, or I don't know what's acknowledged, if that's what your question is. Relatively, it shows up as anything, it's acknowledged what's in your experience. But what is that? I don't think that you can really say that in words, or what is reality, or what's acknowledged, could you clarify the question, or maybe get me closer to what you're asking?
Yeah, 10 bałek. I think that this is a little bit fine line in acknowledging. So I'm trying to figure out what is acknowledging when we know from the precepts that there is no praise and blame. Bowing.
For me, it shows up as that we feel it, we receive it. We're not going to know what it is. It's not acknowledgement in the sense of that we recognize intellectually that we acknowledge the thing. So it's not a acknowledgement in the sense of relative understanding, that we acknowledge what happened as blame, or we acknowledge what happened as praise. And it's an acknowledgement of anything can happen, and you don't know what it is. You can't, or it's, was that helpful, or am I still missing?
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering whether that acknowledgement is just for ourselves, that we acknowledge to ourselves what is happening in front of us or inside of us. Bowing. Versus acknowledging to the other person who is blaming us or praising us, where this dynamic is happening.
I don't think either. I don't think you acknowledge it to yourself, and I don't think you acknowledge in another. I don't feel that that's what's being pointed at with openly acknowledge the way that things are. I would have to reread it, but it's not a self-congratulation or a post-it note about what's showing up. That it's not that kind of acknowledgement. So to acknowledge it to yourself, I'm not saying that that's wrong. We're going to do that. We do that all day. We post-it note the entire world, but I don't think that's what's being pointed at, that kind of acknowledgement. I feel that it's pointing at more of a reception, that maybe calling it acknowledgement is too much. It's more like just presence, or just receiving.
Thank you, this is helpful.
Thank you. Unyo?
When you're bowing, I'm going to bring up a couple of sticky situations. The last part of the long form of that is, as we've just been discussing, we openly acknowledge what has been done. And to me, that seems to indicate that we're leaning more towards perhaps blame. So when we receive news of what's going on in various parts of the world, especially like Gaza, or what we've had to endure here in this community over the last several months, it sure looks like there's a lot of blame. I don't know if that's what Ondo was alluding to earlier, but how do we openly acknowledge what has been done if we don't know what has been done? Bowing.
Well, I'm not saying we're zombies and that we're unaware of the things that have been happening, or unaware of what people have been saying. So the acknowledgement is just to receive that. Can you take me further, or?
When you're bowing, that just to me feels like that's a really nice thing to say if we're sitting here in this wonderful Zendo and this beautiful day with the sun shining and no bombs are falling around us. Story would probably be different if we were in different circumstances.
Absolutely, if bombs are falling, then action is immediate. It's almost easier. You run like hell, or maybe you fight. You need to fight. That's your karma. You'll probably be catapulted into action quicker than on a nice, comfortable day, a little bit bored, not really sure what to do.
So as we're taking action, are we moving into one direction of that precept or another? Praise doesn't seem applicable, but it sure sounds like blame. Is that part of the fuel for our action? Following?
Is what part of the fuel for our action?
Blame.
It can, but also this could be, I'm sure people are subtly praising too for protecting a community or for helping those who have been hurt by this community. So there's some subtle forms of praise too, of lifting up oneself for standing up for the abuse, taking a stand. And blaming or praise on our end for sticking it through and understanding the teachings and being on the right side. So it's always both ways, and it flips back and forth from person to person. I think both bring us into action, and that's what's kind of heartbreaking, just how, the kind of action that comes out of that kind of thinking, that we need to stop the blame, or that we need to, I don't know, go to war in one way or another.
Thank you for now.
Okay. Anyone online?
Deb Bowing. This may have been asked in other ways, but a question that's coming up for me is the blame that has consequences that would harm or cause harm. Is there action to be done with that which will cause harm in the blaming? Deb Bowing.
Appreciate the question, but too vague. You can't know without the situation, like what kind of harm. There's uncomfortable harm, so there's so many varying causes and conditions that sometimes you would just step in at the begin of some harm. You would recognize the situation, stop it immediately. And others, you might let the pain endure. Maybe someone's abusing you, and maybe they just need to do that, and you can receive that. Just to come up with a couple of examples of how much that can differ. Go ahead.
Deb Bowing. Is the openly acknowledging something like whatever action happens will happen on its own? That was sort of alluded to and mentioned. It will just, if there is action to be taken, it will just happen on its own. And that, is it the acknowledging of your responses that's the most important part? Deb Bowing.
Sorry, I got a little lost in my mind. It was did you ask if it was important, the kind of your responsibility for your reaction? Is that close to how you asked it?
Deb Bowing, yes, that sounds right. I'm having a hard time articulating what my mind is thinking. Thank you. That would, yes, Deb Bowing.
I think so. I think that's a better place to start rather than fixing the people around you or fixing situations around you. Maybe we could have some curiosity how it shows up in our mind stream. We could have some more curiosity through that practice of looking at our mind to see how that might show up in someone else. So it's a soft and open way to how really messy things show up. You've been through some periods in your life where you probably have done some regrettable things. We all have, and to see how that forms gives us a little bit of compassion towards other people who are dumping it on us, because we didn't have an alternative. We were the demon. We just are our karma. I'm not saying that we don't have any control over our life or justifying doing bad behavior. I'm just saying that life is difficult, and that, yes, to go back to your question, I think we should look here first.
Thank you, Deb Bowing.
Thank you.
Bowing. At the beginning, only Buddha action exists, and then it goes on to know there is no one to hurt or no one to be hurt. No one to benefit, no one to be benefited. If one does not have an understanding of no self, how can we understand what's being said when there is no one to hurt, no one to be hurt?
I think just to be considered, I wouldn't fall on that teaching as a way to justify anything, or I think that's a dangerous game to say that, you know, if you don't really in your heart understand that there is no self and no other, then I wouldn't prop yourself up with that teaching and justify something. There was another part to your question.
Just those two parts of the spectrum. It's just trying to understand that this world sure looks real to me, and I think I see people, and so it seems like there are things that I do that can hurt or benefit people. So to receive this teaching that, well, it's almost as if it's saying, well, that's not true. There's no one to hurt, no one to be hurt. When I'm looking around, seeing a lot of people that are hurt, as I struggle with the understanding of no self, it's just a matter of how to maybe better interpret what's being said here. Bowing.
Yeah, I would say that's your practice, that you've received that teaching that there is no self, there's no one to be hurt, no one to hurt and no one to be hurt. So see if you can find that in yourself first before that becomes fuel for something else or fuel for any action. Until we're very clear about what that means, then probably shouldn't be running our lives. We're probably not very clear, or kind of weaponizing that teaching in one way or another, or peacifying that teaching, but still causing warfare based on our misunderstanding of what that means. So if you're not clear about it, then just keep looking at it. I think all of the Buddhist teachings are kind of harping on that point in one way or another, that, you know, the simple one is that we come from our parents. You don't exist in a vacuum. Nothing exists by itself. Everything is dependently arisen. And in that way, there's no self. And one interesting way that shows up for me is that when I'm hurt a day later, I can't find that hurt anymore. Maybe on the body it lasts longer, and maybe in the mind it can last a while too, but there will be reprieve from that. Nothing lasts forever either. So I think that's what's being pointed at, is that there's not a solid self. There's relatively a self. It feels very real. We are hurt. We do feel this. We are in this world, but not ultimately. It just looks that way.
I want to go back to something you said early on. I believe you said, and I could be mistaken, that praise and blame are the same thing as nerve endings. So I'm curious, if something is occurring to this supposed self. And taking into consideration nerve endings, at what point do those nerve endings tell us, oh, it's praise, or oh, it's blame? What happens for us to determine which side of the spectrum that is on? Does that make sense?
I mean, one's pleasurable, one's not pleasurable, and that distinction is made up, or like the praise and blame is just a way of talking about how our world shows up, how we congratulate someone, or how we fluff something up and build it up. So that can occur in so many ways, but that distinction in and of itself isn't really like a, I don't know, a perceivable thing. This is talking about it, so I can't find praise or blame. I don't know if I addressed your question.
You mind? I think it's the issue of the word sane, praise and blame, or pain and pleasure. Maybe that might have been more to what you were saying. They're the same thing, because there's that word because of nerve endings. And so what is the process once the nerve endings are intact or are agitated that moves us into either pain or pleasure, or praise or blame?
If I'm following your question, I think it's quite often out of fear. We're not willing to feel that. We're not willing to feel pain. And if we have pleasure, we're going right after it. We're trying to find more of it and how to keep this going. So, and that is just conditioning independently arisen too. If that's what you're asking about, how does it move into praise or how does it move into blame? It's just a landslide. We're human beings. We're the landslide, and we are very odd and particular and unique in our own ways for how that'll show up. So I don't know how or like or why that's happening, but it seems to just happen that way, that we then go from the feeling to thinking about it and grasping at it.
Thank you.
Kabowing, if someone is coming at us and telling us that we hurt them, and we feel that we do have or have hurt them or caused there's some kind of culpability that we can sense, what is our responsibility in that situation to that person?
I'm not sure would need a specific situation, but sounds like an apology might be warranted if you're in agreement that you did overstep a bound in some way or another. And you could ask if there was a way to help the situation, or you could talk about that. You could talk about that with that person if you're close enough with them. I think that, yeah, you can be responsible in that relative way. There more? Are you thinking of something specific?
Kabowing, I'm thinking in the area of feelings, somebody has been hurt emotionally. Is there anything to be done to respond to that person? I heard you say apologize and perhaps offers some kind of assistance. Yeah, I guess I'm just looking at is there necessarily a responsibility in that situation?
I think that there's always a responsibility, or in the sense of we should be trying to take care of our life and take care of the people around us and be clear about what's happening, and it sounds like you're clear enough to say that you made a mistake. And then any action that comes forth from that is just going to differ. And I would also say that you might not need to do anything. Maybe that was enough, or maybe then the person's turmoil and all of that needs to occur after being hurt. So they might not need your help either. You might not have to handhold them, because that could also be your regret in a egocentric sense, trying to cover up your mistakes, help the other person get through what you caused them. But very situational. That's why I think at the beginning I suggested just talking to the person about it, if it seemed appropriate, if it's that kind of an intimate relationship where you have that in.
Thank you.
Divine, what do we do with our teacher when we see him praise or blame? Is that a teaching, bowing?
I mean, I think everything's a teaching, specifically with the teacher as a practitioner on the path. But quite a few people taking exception to using that word, or not necessarily agreeing with that teaching, that everything the teacher does is a teaching. And the way that I understand what a teaching is to do your best to receive it, to recognize when you're receiving what you perceive your teacher is, recognize all your thoughts around that. Even calling it praise or blame is taking a step away from the teaching. Unless you can be more specific about it, that's what I'd say.
Divine, I'm just wondering, you've had the occasion recently to hear our teacher praise and hear our teacher blame. Is that a specific teaching? How do we work with a teacher who praises and blames? Bowing.
Not clear on the question. Same as anything else, or teachers going to praise and blame. Our teacher often prefaces it with that's not a compliment, and that's been helpful to me to kind of understand the no praise or blame, that any situation that happens is dependently arisen. No one gets credit for that. There's no one to get credit, and no one deserves credit for it, for all the hard work they've done. They don't realize that they were just in the right situation for that to occur.
Divine, is there a difference between the teacher blaming and someone who doesn't see? Or is there a difference between someone who sees not separate and blames, and someone who doesn't see not separate and blames?
I think you could differentiate that, but I wouldn't. I do your best to give all of your attention to the teacher. We need a point to focus on. We need a person to focus on. We should have, or it's beneficial, at least in Buddhism, to have a guide to teach you through this, to look at him closely, have everything he does as a teaching, but it's just as much a teaching from a confused person. And there are differences in how that behavior manifests from someone who sees what this is and from a confused perspective. I don't necessarily know how to parse that out, because it could look the same. And it might be the same. I don't really know the difference there. Chokudala.
Chocolate Boeing. This is a fantastic talk, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
Best talk.
Are you praising them?
I think it sucks.
Did you say something about seeing praise and blame here first within oneself?
I think so, or I think that that's almost always the place to start, because we can really see how that develops and forms and we have a firsthand view on how that hits us when someone praises us or when someone blames us. Gives us a little more insight into what's happening with other people or blaming, what it's like to blame someone and be furious with someone, and or even just blame in like a general justification way. We just kind of blame a situation like, well, it's not really my fault because this and this and this happened. But if we can be very familiar with how we can concoct stories around, I don't know, I'm not even sure why. We're just so scared. We're scared to make mistakes. We're scared to look bad. We're scared to be in pain. We're all just big fear balls walking around. It's painful. So you have an opportunity to get close to it and know that intimately here. And it's, you could practice with other people. It's just maybe easier to laminate on or not. You don't see as much of it when it's appearing externally. You just get the heat. You don't know how that came about, where you might have a little bit more of a closer look if it's within your own sensorium.
SokukoJi, feel like personally I have a hard time seeing it within myself compared to seeing being blamed by someone who seems external. And I would call that pride and shame to praise and blame. So I'm wondering if you have some advice on how to see that more clearly on this end.
You're doing it. I think you practice a lot. I think that's the best way to do it. That you don't have to get to the point where you feel like you see it in yourself. You know, use your practice, use your teacher, use the community. Just keep returning to those. I think it probably will always feel that way. We always feel experts on other people's lives. It's easy to see how other people are confused, but it's not so easy to see the way that we're confused. And I think that to your first part where we get to know it more intimately because we witness it here, it doesn't show up as an understanding. So it's like we're never gonna figure this out. We're never gonna see when we're prideful, and maybe we will. Maybe eventually that happens, but it's probably not gonna feel that way. Sokuzan's into the darkness. It looks dark. We don't see it. We don't see it. We don't see it, and it's painful. Thank you. Unyo and then Jishin, I'll take your question next.
Bowing, what if we meet someone who doesn't think they ever do anything wrong? I think it's called a narcissist. I think in our political spectrum, we have a big example of that. But if we're faced with it in our own lives, and we can see what that seems to be, what would be a way to work with that? Bowing.
Can you rephrase it? I lost you.
When you bowing, just simply, if we are working with somebody who never thinks they do anything wrong, but it is obvious to us and perhaps others that that is not the case, is there any action to be taken in those situations?
More than likely not, unless you're really close to them. You need an in to be able to get to people's confusion to make them better. They have to want to do that. You can't just go around teaching people. So a teacher is a little bit different. You've agreed to go into that area with them. You've agreed to have them help you in some way or another. That's a confusing and sticky area. We don't really know what we're signing up for or even who our teacher is. But generally, if we're judging someone to be a narcissist, I'd say leave them alone. Don't teach them. you don't need to teach anyone. If it's time that they see that and you're a part of that, then great. But it doesn't need to be some big agenda of yours. So I wouldn't worry about action.
You done?
Mhm.
So two parts to this question, two questions actually. The first question is it possible for anyone to see that they are full of pride or they're manifesting as full of themselves or prideful? Is it possible to see that?
I think so.
If one sees that, is it possible to stop being prideful?
I don't think the way you word it is like,
How should I word it?
well, just that it felt like a project that they've seen it and then they decide to not be prideful. I don't think that there's much choice in that. Might stay or it might go.
One more question around that, since you've taken it that direction. Is it possible for one to be actually full of pride and function in such a way that they appear very humble?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, or I resonate with that with my own self, or just trying to be polished, or that I quite often have been, I'm afraid to look bad, and it's a form of pride, or so I can relate to that in my own. And other people are like I think the example that comes up for me is like spiritually stinky people, like when it's just gross, too much compassion and how awesome they're doing at everything, even though it's very fluffy and it sounds good. Lots of people are good, especially if they've been practicing a while at making that sound earthy and real. And there's still a lot of tendrils supporting the identity behind a lot of that behavior. And yeah, it's painful to receive that in yourself or others. Let me go to Jishin, and then I'll go to Jishin.
Jishin bowing. And still with acknowledgement of blame. Is acknowledgement of blame acknowledging the first noble truth that life is suffering? Bowing.
I think it's a way that shows up. Yeah, I think quite often, or that's quite often it shows up as blame, or that's the way people suffered. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you. Shoto?
Shadow bowing, feel like I've heard something like, if you see anything like praise, blame, anything that you're saying, like that person's prideful or they're blaming me, that's us. And is there it's not a clear question, but like, what does that mean for like, that recognition out there to be us or about us bowing?
Or the way I understand you asking the question is just that's your projection about it. And quite often our projections can be relatively accurate, but that is us, that description of a prideful person, it's not actually showing up that way. That's just our description of how that person is showing up. And that blinds us then from what they do next because we think they're a prideful person. So it's you. It's always you if you see a prideful person in front of you. That's just your projection. Or if that's the way you're phrasing the question.
Shadow bowing. And I think I'm wondering if there's another like half of that where we might also like literally be doing those things and not aware of it. Like, is there some quality of that when we see people doing stuff we're condemning, bowing?
Maybe, or I've heard other people talk about it that way. I'm sorry, I'm not real. I'm not sure. There might be something to that. James,
James Bowen. Uh, doesn't pride, blame, and praise all require the delusion of ownership being possible?
maybe.
All right. So I was reading a thing that's saying no doer besides karma and result in one of the Tibetan texts, and it was saying nothing in the beginning and nothing in the future has a doer. So that's what's getting me thinking about ownership. But how would you help somebody that themselves they think that they own what they did, so they're prideful in it because they think it's theirs?
We all do that. It's
Not with everything. I'm sure there's at least one thing that you could find that you don't think.
that I don't think I have ownership over.
Yeah, people don't want to take blame for something because they think they weren't involved in it.
It's still kind of ownership to reject something. You're still owning yourself. You're still having a positionality about it. So that's the way I'm using ownership to respond to your question, is that just the positionality is. And another thing I'd like to say also is just that teachings can be pretty magnetizing. It's one thing to read something and be magnetized by it, but it's quite often in the face of how our life actually shows up. And I think we need to get in touch with the grittier side. It's that there's no doer doing anything is a helpful teaching, but we can't be supported by that. We can't live life feeling like there's no doer. That's just another doer. We really need to, that's embarrassing to see. It's embarrassing to see that we're using a teaching to prop ourselves up and walk around like we're some special person. You have something further, James?
Yeah, I was told Native Americans didn't understand the idea of property rights, and I'm thinking like that mentality of, you absolutely don't know a concept of ownership, and if you don't know a concept of self or doer, the idea of just karma just working on its own. If how would you actually adjust to how do you adjust to being aware that you are just reactive, even in your own thoughts, they're still just reactive? How would you actually see that?
Practice a lot. Get in touch with how that's happening. Get in touch with how you're building the world up, how it doesn't look like impersonal karma in this life, that it really looks and feels like you're a person and you're in pain and you need to do something about it. That's the reality of it, is we're all being abraded. Life is suffering.
Would just trying to do absolutely nothing show that? If you just sat down and just did nothing, would you see that by doing the opposite?
Maybe, no guarantee. It's, I guess, the only way I've run into, or this is the only path that's felt like it's been fundamentally helpful for me. Rather than some kind of fixing strategy to go to war with what's arising, to gain some knowledge, gain some understanding of how the world works, to make my life better, to alleviate my suffering. Doesn't appear to work. It appears that we need to see what this is. And that, I think, can happen in so many ways. I think it even just karmically, sometimes there are spontaneous realizers and it just happens, but think if we're interested in this, I think if you're here, you have some interest in it. So I think we just practice.
What
And
do you practice?
I mean, it's different for you, or I wouldn't tell you what to practice necessarily, but I live in a monastery. That's a bit worked out for me, or I work with my teacher to determine what my practice is, or try to include him on what I'm doing so that he can adjust it. Maybe our practice is self-centered and not really helping us see more clearly. So good idea to have someone else to check in with who you can trust.
Okay, but what do you think the practice itself is as a thing?
Sitting still, what I would say is the primary practice, but I wouldn't go too much into philosophy of what the practice is. You don't need to know what the practice is. Just try it out for a couple of years. Anything else,
All right,
James?
thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and close. Thank you.